I actually want to start with a personal question. As I said in my introduction, you have spent time working on the ground in your communities, and now you're looking at how this issue plays out, not only domestically, but around the world. I think it'd be really valuable for everybody to hear a little bit about sort of what brought you to this point in your thinking about inequality.
Not easy. Where do I start? Well, that's a really good question, Alex, because I think it's important for people to know a little bit about Kate and, how did she get to this point and why is she so passionate about inequality, because that is something which I see every day. I think it's important for most people to understand that I grew up in a very political household. So my mum came here from Nigeria and she taught me from a very young age that you have to stand up for what you believe in. And she came here as a woman in her sort of 20s. She had 4 children and she battled in, majority of her life, every part of her life, every turn that she took, she was challenged. And I saw that and I felt that was normal, that you always had to fight for things. And so everywhere I go, wherever I work, I join groups which mean that I have to speak up for others because I can see that it's unfair. And I think if I'm honest, I've always had to battle for everything that I've got. So that's one of the reasons that I am the way I am. But I really think that the more we ignore inequality, especially in country, the worse it's going to get. Before I became an MP, I had my first big job and I was a manager of a practice, a surgery, GP surgery. And that was the first time that I'd actually been paid enough money to look after myself and look after my family. Before that, I'd always had part-time jobs or had jobs where I wasn't paid enough. So I had to rely on the state to top up my salary and to pay for my rent. And so I've always struggled, but I knew that I was going to be somewhere. So that's why I talk the way I do, because just because someone is in a position that they're in at that time, it doesn't mean that they're not going to get somewhere else. And we have to always remember that. And we mustn't leave people behind. So that's why I'm like this.
And let me, that you outlined in your speech some of the things that you think that this means. Tackling inequality is about a lot of tough politics, right? It's about exclusion and discrimination. Can you talk a little bit about what you think that would mean for UK aid and DFID when you're taking on not just the fact that people are poor and need a hand up, but really some of the deep systemic issues that prevent us from addressing inequality?
Well, I think one of the biggest issues that we have about addressing it is because we don't accept that it is impossible to expect someone to live off, $2 a day or $1 a day. None of us can do that. So we give people this false reality and we work around that and expect to be able to deliver aid where we're bringing people up and they're able to be sufficient without relying on the aid that comes in. Many countries that get aid, that's the only money that comes in because nobody is living off enough money to generate enough money to pay taxes, to be able to bring their whole family up and not be reliant on aid. So I think one of the first things that we must challenge and break down is talk about this myth that we expect people to be able to live off $1 a day, $2 a day, $10 a day. For us to even get on the tube in the UK, for one journey is about £4 or something. It's ridiculous that we do that and then we use that as our marker and we're never ever going to be able to achieve what the aid goal is that we're supposed to be able to reduce poverty. We will never be able to do that. And then we're in this vicious cycle and we're not allowing people to be able to stand up for themselves without reliant on aid. And then we have really bad relationships with governments where we're not expecting the government to support their own, because that's the role of the government. The government should be there as a state to support the most vulnerable, and they're not doing that. So we have these very, very dysfunctional relationships, and a lot of it stems from the first relationship that the UK or the West had with Africa and had with Asia, where it was that we went and we took. We've always taken and we've never looked at that relationship, and we're still doing that. We're still taking from people and we're not allowing people to stand up on their own. And I think that's one of the first challenges. And I think that in itself, once we do that, then we can start looking at the challenges. And that's where my vision of looking at inequality will take place. Because if we are honest with ourselves and say, look, someone needs at least £50 a day, as an example, to live. And if they're not getting that, then those challenges will still be there. And that's why we're going around in circles. And whilst we're doing that, we've got conflicts, we've got disagreements, we've got borders which are not genuine borders, so they're porous and people are moving in and out. And those same people who are supposedly living off $1 a day are the ones on the front line, and they're the ones suffering the most. And then we don't take responsibility for that, or we're complicit in those wars. And I speak, passionately about this because we need to take some responsibility of why the world looks the way it does. And aid is used as another arm to suppress people, and we mustn't use it in that way. We must use it to empower people and make sure people are able to stand on their own 2 feet and be independent and be proud, because these people are proud,
So I think your description of your recent trip was very powerful and moving, and obviously you linked it to the broader issues of climate change, which pose enormous challenges. I understand you were also recently in Iraq.
Yes.
And you've talked about conflict, and you've talked about, I think this idea is very interesting, about the incredible number of people who are below an ethical poverty line. So one of the questions that ministers have to deal with every day is making hard choices. And I wonder if you could articulate a little bit about how you would make decisions about where is the best way, given the enormity of some of those challenges, where is the best way for the UK to deploy its resources to be able to make a difference on some of those things, because they're bigger than what any one country can take on.
Yeah, I'll start off. I went to Erbil recently, and I was able to meet with female MPs who came from different ethnic groups, and they were all MPs, and they had very difficult experiences prior to being elected. And my role was to be part of the round table to talk about peace and how important it is that everyone is being listened to. Now, aid could be used to help support groups where people want to rebuild their democracy. They want to be listened whilst it's being rebuilt, but they also want the support from maybe more developed democracies that can allow them to know that you may fall off at times, you may have disagreements at times, but fundamentally what you're trying to do is the right thing. Because if you haven't got a flourishing democracy, then, I could speak about what's happening now in the UK, but I won't go into that. But if you haven't got a flourishing democracy, that is part of where the issues around, the inequality lie, because there is nobody speaking up who's been elected. People are there for too long, and there's no movement, natural movement. So that's an area which I'm very passionate about, is around democracy. I would say that as an MP. But going to Erbil and seeing a very young democracy coming together, and knowing how important it is that women who have been on the forefront of the conflict prior to being elected, how important it is that they were there and I was with them. But I think one of the main things around looking at where you deploy is listening to people who need your help. And we're not good at that. We normally make a decision based on something which we think is right in Whitehall. We're not on the ground listening to the people who need the help. So that's one of the first things that I would do, was actually be listening to the people on the ground to finding out what they feel they need. And some things, of course, you have to manage people's expectation, but a lot of the time it will be humble and it will be realistic. So we would be looking at healthcare systems, we'll be looking at education. Like I said, I met young Mayas. Mayas is not a school. So Dominica needs a school. I've been to the front line, I've seen it firsthand. There was no hospital in Barbuda. There are old people on the island, there are young people on the island, they need a hospital. So that's one of the first things. We need to look at the systems which we take for granted. And when we're rebuilding a state or a country, we need to look at the systems which make you strong and make you independent, and help you to be less reliant on the outside world. So these are the areas, health, education, roads that work, transport that works. These things are really important when you're rebuilding, and a democracy where people have been elected fairly, and the election people feel it was done in a transparent way.
So I'm going to bring in some outside voices as well into our conversation. We've got folks here in the audience and we've got folks online. Good news and bad news. We are trending on Twitter, but we're only number 2. So if you're not asking a question, please tweet one, and then maybe that'll get us over the top. I'm actually going to start, though, in the spirit of trying to get our online folks generated. I'm going to start with an online question because I think it's a great one, and then I'll go to the audience. Susanna Pickering Sakwa, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, says, as an alumni of the University of East London, what will you do to work to increase public and especially young people's engagement with the development agenda? And let me combine that with another question, which is how do you talk to your constituents about why some of them who may be suffering the ills of poverty, why it's so important for the UK to be a leader in international development and to be spending at the levels that it does. So maybe kind of bring those two things together.
Susan?
It was Susanna.
Susanna.
Yeah.
Well, hi, Susanna. I went to East London University.
Oh.
So it's not a planted question. Now, for those of you that don't know much about East London University, I went there as a mature student. It is a hub for, I think, everybody and anybody that didn't go to university at a young age. So it's a lot of mature students that are there. And I loved it there. I did international development there. And most of my colleagues were from all over the world. So I'm sure Susanna is. I don't think she's British. I'm not sure by her name. I can't tell yet. So I do go back to East London quite a lot. They invite me. They're very proud of me. And that's another thing about East London University, which maybe people that didn't go to university like that wouldn't appreciate. But we really encourage each other. It's a place where everyone's very proud because of the journey it took us to get there. So my message whenever I go to East London University is to tell them to enjoy the time whilst they're there, and everything that you're taught there is a springboard to where you're going to end up. And I say that and they sort of look at me and think, oh, you would say that, but that's the truth, because it's so unique that you are around mature students, you're around people from all over the world. I was studying international development. I had people next to me that had come from, war-torn countries. They were sitting next to me. They were taking over the classes at times and talking to the lecturers, telling the lecturers, no, this is what's actually happening. And at the time, I just thought this was normal, but it's not. It's not. Normally you're in a room with people that don't really know what's happening out on the ground, but they're lecturers. So that's what I take from that, and I say that in my response because there are many leaders in East London University already without knowing that, and I always tell them that. So we end up having a conversation together. I don't go and talk to them; we talk together. Which is fantastic. And Edmonton, for those of you that don't know much about Edmonton, again, it's very multicultural. I think English people are the minority. Most people have come from all over the world. I have a huge Kurdish constituents, and they're having a lot of problems back home in Turkey. Many of them can vote in the election. A majority of them vote for HDP, and a lot of their MPs are now incarcerated. So it's quite a political constituency, and because of that, I'm very close to the Kurdish fight, but I'm also very much involved with all the other groups, and which is fantastic, which is good for me because I'm always being fed and I'm always learning. But it's a live issue in the sense that it's a constituency which has people in it that are living and breathing, conflict at times, but at the same time they're in a place which is safe and they're comfortable and they benefit from that. So me being the Shadow Secretary for International Development kind of fits in with my constituency because it is an international constituency and we learn from each other and we celebrate each other. But at the same time, the domestic issues, they are the brunt end of that as well. I have many constituents who are living off very little amount of money a day. They are reliant on the public sector a lot, And as we know, the public sector is under a lot of strain. My local hospital can have up to 500 people attending the A&E in any one day. Many people are reliant on the private sector for housing, and unfortunately most of those homes are not fit for anyone to live in. So, you know, my hometown where I represent is very complex, but it spurs me on to know that we have to make things better here as well as, you know, back home for many of them as well.
All right, let's go to the audience. I'm going to ask you if you wouldn't mind to say your name and identify where you come from, and whether you have a question or a comment. Either way, just please keep it brief. We have somebody on the side here. Yeah, there you go.
Thanks very much, Kate. Jane Backhurst from Christian Aid, and thanks for your work last year on Nigeria and on the Lake Chad Basin as well. You mentioned this new international development experts group, which is, I think, a fantastic idea before final decisions are taken around Labour's manifesto. But I think it would be really helpful as well to hear from you what you have in mind in relation to the World Humanitarian Summit outcomes, reshaping the humanitarian system, and just making those connections between the SDGs and the World Humanitarian Summit. And also thanks for your work on pushing this issue of climate change is here right now. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Jane. Fantastic question that you're asking me. I think we first, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's signed up thus far. There are 10 people, but I'm not going to name them. Are any of them in the room? Can they wave? The experts. We've got. Thank you for that. At the back as well. Is that Anne at the back? Excellent, cool. Anne Pettifor. So, as I said in my speech, you know, we need to look at how we are delivering, you know, aid, and we need to look at, you know, the areas which are most neglected. And one of the main things for me is getting a task force together to inform me on the areas which most need a lot of work. So as I said in my speech, you know, I spoke about tax avoidance. Now that's one of the biggest areas, even in the UK, that if we got that system correct and we actually got people paying into it, that in itself is something which those people in the public who read stories, not too sure what's going on, is this right, is this wrong, all these scare stories, you know, that we were going through the end of last year. We need to start addressing those stories, but we also need to have stories which we can give to them. And that is why if we don't look at the global system as it works now and we don't address it, I mean, I'm speaking to like-minded people, but we need to push it further than that. So we bring more people in, new people in, so they can inform all of us on where they think we should be investing. Looking at the NHS and how that works, we love it, we support it. We know it's underfunded, but we need to transfer that system and cost that system in developing countries. Education, going back, I always think of young Myas that I met, you know, the little 10-year-old girl. She's not at school. This is not acceptable. So we need to challenge all of those things. We need to make sure that we have something to offer, something we can sell on the doorstep, because as I said, my constituency in Edmonton, many of the people there are sending money back home, whether it's to Turkey, whether it's to Nigeria, you know, Colombia, all over the world. And they signed up, and there's many constituencies which are like that. They've signed up to it, but we're not talking to them because we make it seem like it's something where we only respond to humanitarian crisis, and we must respond to humanitarian crisis. But that is also something we're too good at doing because it becomes the only story. But there are some stories, as you know, we've worked together on the Lake Chad issue problem. Some of them are not being spoken enough about. And that is, you know, we feel the same way on that. So there's a lot of work to be done, and we need to shift the way that we respond. But at the same time, there are some things, until they are fixed, we will keep responding to them. You know? It's a difficult one, isn't it?
Great, thanks. I've got a question way in the back there.
I'll stand up because you won't be able to see me otherwise. I'm Molly Canary. I'm from the Legatum Institute, and thank you so much for coming out tonight. I'd, by the way, like to volunteer our forces for your new task force. I think it sounds tremendously exciting. I think you got it spot on that aid cannot be a substitute for well-functioning commerce in the developing world if we're actually going to get people out of poverty. And at the end of the day, that's why we're all here. And you also referenced the fact that the terms of trade between the first world and the developing world are often quite exploitative. And I was wondering if you had any specific policy proposals around that laid out thus far, or is that still sort of an embryonic phase for you?
Thank you, Molly. Thank you for offering your services. Anyone else, you're very welcome to join in. The more, the merrier. Now, Molly, obviously, I'm not going to announce anything now. I mean, I would say loads of stuff, but I'd get in trouble. But I just think your comments that you've made are the core issue, and we need to address them. We need to speak up about them a lot more. And we mustn't behave like there is a level playing field, because there isn't. And there hasn't been for many, many years. And the sooner we talk about that and articulate that, it will ensure that everything we do is based on the fact that there is one side which is, always benefiting at the expense of the other side. I think that for me is one of the core conversations that I will continue having, and I know people like yourself will be as well. So thank you for that comment. It's fantastic.
I wanted to come back to one thing that you mentioned in your speech, because I think it's been a subject of a lot of debate, and that's that as in the last few years, as UK aid has grown, it is increasingly being spent not only by the Department for International Development, but other departments as well. And I think you raised some concern about that. And I wanted to ask you, under a new government, how would you change? Is it that you would move the spending differently, you would establish different criteria? What are some of the things that you would do differently that you think address some of the concerns you raised in your speech?
Well, I think there's quite a few people that are concerned about the way that the aid money gets spent by other departments. But I think for myself and for Labour in government, we would have a cross-government coherent policy, which does include different departments in the way that the aid money is spent. But that's in conjunction with them spending their own money. And I think that's where we're not good at. We leave the door open for anyone to just take what they want. We need to have a conversation on how we respond to a situation, which may mean that Defence or the Foreign Office are part of that response, but then they should use their own budget and respond to the same situation. And I think that's where we've not been good. But some policies, I believe, would be cross-government, and the sooner we get good at that. I know, Gordon Brown was good at that. He used to have the Treasury team working with him, the Treasury team would be in DFID as well as, in different departments, but working with them, not dictating. And I think that's what I would encourage, because there's lots of situations and lots of lessons from the past that I would definitely sign up to and not say they didn't work. But it's about having a cross-governmental, coherent policy which shows everybody this is your responsibility and you take it from your budget. And if you haven't got that money, then you don't take it from another budget. Because that's, for me, what's wrong, personally. And that DFID has an exemplary, background on knowing how to spend money and know how to be transparent. So maybe they need to teach other departments on how to do the same. Why not?
Great. Let's go back to the audience for a couple more. Maybe we'll take this gentleman, the two gentlemen with their hands up now. We can take them together.
Thank you. William Brown. I'm from the Open University and currently doing some research into Labour's policy during the years of opposition on international development. But clearly one of the big challenges currently facing development policy is Brexit and the impact that's going to have. So I was interested to hear what thinking is going on within Labour about how to respond to the challenges Brexit poses for international development policy, both in terms of aid as well as trade relations.
This might be the longest event I've ever been in without the mention of the B word in London here.
Apologies.
Thank you. It's an excellent question, and this gentleman here.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Kate. I'm Rob Yates. I'm a political health economist. Of course, it's not that long ago that Britain was a post-conflict state, war-torn and dependent on aid. I mean, it was dependent on US aid at the end of the Second World War. And the incoming Labour government, to rebuild Britain, had a big focus on building a welfare state, providing everyone with universal free health and education services. How much do you see this as something that a new Labour government would do to encourage countries like sort of India and Pakistan and Nigeria, which got huge inequalities and really haven't got a functioning welfare state at all? Do you see this as very much part of your policy to these countries?
Well,
Two good questions.
good questions. So Brexit. where's oh yeah, I was wondering where you were. Well, how can we have a meeting and not talk about Brexit? Now, in all seriousness, for me, my concern is that if there's going to be any trade deals with developing countries, who is going to be exploited? And we know who's going to be exploited. It's going to be the ones who don't have a voice. It's going to be those that haven't got a currency that's strong enough. It's going to be the countries where they don't have infrastructures which they own, whether it's the ports, the airports, because somebody that's come in to build the road or build the airport has taken control of, what comes in and out. So because of that unfair, playing field, my concern is that the countries which are developing, and I don't even like using that word, but we'll use it for the sake of today, they will be the ones that are most exploited. So any deal that's taking place, it's got to be that they're treated fairly. And when you're relying on governments which are not functioning properly, as Rob eloquently said, you've got countries where there is no functioning health service, there's no functioning education service. So if these things are not functioning and there are prime ministers or presidents in charge, their people are going to be the ones who pay the price. And when you have so many young people in Africa, as an example, that don't have a job, they will be the first ones pushed to the front line. So I'm deeply concerned about how Brexit is going to affect the Commonwealth. Even though the Commonwealth leaders are scrambling to get to the front of the queue to have conversations with the UK. So I keep my eye on that. I work very closely with Barry Gardner. Barry's got a fantastic team. And, we're trying our best to make sure, in opposition, at least, we can have those conversations. But as a Labour government, I can assure you, people will come first and they will not be getting exploited if there's any deals to be put on the table. So that's what I would say, and that's what Kate would be doing. And Rob, I slightly answered your question, but I think we've got a great opportunity, to rebuild those functioning, services which keep us well, keep us educated. And I think we have an opportunity to grow and to allow those countries which are reliant on aid to have strong systems and strong structures around them. So as they're young and coming through, they're able to go to school, go to university and stay at home. I mean, my family are Nigerian and most of my cousins will leave by the age of 15, 16 to come to the UK or to America to do their exams, and then they stay away until they're finished doing their masters, and then they may go back. That's the common story, because there is not an education system that is fit for purpose. If you are coming from a certain background, I should say, not everyone can afford to leave.
We're almost out of time. Let me ask you something that you, I think, just talked about, but to broaden a little bit about the UK role in the world more broadly. I think for many people, this is one of the most uncertain times that the world has seen since World War II and the creation of many of the institutions that have driven, including DFID and the Departments for International Development in their various forms that you talked about. And the balancing of thinking about the UK role in the world and what it means to reignite or renew approaches towards multilateralism and international cooperation. Just talk a little bit about partnership and how does the UK both lead but also bring along the community that's going to be necessary to tackle some of these massive challenges that you've outlined?
I think there's one good thing that I always find when I travel is that most countries really respect the UK. They really respect British systems. They actually think they work. Whether that's good or bad, whether that's right, we will separate. But we have a position in the world where people respect us. And that is, of course, has been exploited. People have travelled and exploited other countries. But the essence of that is that we can lead because of that. How we lead, we have an opportunity now to lead in a way which shows that we listen to others, that we always respect other people's cultures, other people's religions. We bring that into our own home to understand what that means for those people. We don't victimize people. We don't isolate people. We don't allow media to tell the people at home that this is what a Muslim man looks like, or this is what, a bad person looks like, or a good person. We need to move away from that. And because we haven't done that as a leading nation, we've allowed our nation to, be in the position that we're in now, where, we're leaving the EU, which were our friends and our neighbours. Regardless of whether you want to leave or not, I'm not going to get into that debate. The bottom line is that we've built friendships with these people, and now we're walking away from that. How will that look to these same countries which are reliant on aid from us or reliant on us to lead? We walk away from our friends, we walk away from people. And sometimes you don't get on, but you've got to be able to communicate and understand what it is that you don't like about the system to make it change for it to work. We have an opportunity as a Labour government, or DFID has an opportunity, because we're respected as leaders, because we're respected, because we support a lot of people as well, that we now need to lead and allow others to lead us, so we can understand what it means for them to live off $10 a day or whatever it is, that these markers and these targets that we've put down for others and expected others to be able to deliver. We also need to look at different countries and how they're being forced to survive only producing maybe one product. And then when they try and sell that product in the open market, their currency means nothing. So they're battling against a system which is always making them lose. We need to see what it's like for us to live in a way that we don't ever have to. As I said, I just came back from Dominica and I met young Myas and her dad. She's not at school, they haven't got any money. I went there for not even one day, we were there for a couple of hours and I experienced that. It's horrendous. But then I'm going to stay in the UK and say, oh, she can, live off, beans and rice for 3 months and sardines. I don't have to live like that. So why would I expect someone else to live like that? So it's like leadership, cooperation, communication, respect. We have that opportunity. And I think that DFID as a department is crucial and is as a conduit to bring other departments with us while we look at the world through our eyes. Because we have that unique responsibility. And I think I'm excited by that. I think it's a good thing.
So last question, to leave us on a final excited and happy note. You've been doing some traveling in this role. Give us a story of hope. Give us your version of where you think things are going right, that give us some guide for how things are going to get better.
Well, I briefly spoke about going to Erbil, and I've never been to, I didn't know what to expect, I'm going to be honest. So I was a bit scared because I'd read stuff. But when I went there was like wall-to-wall hotels. It was quite liberal. Everybody was having great conversations. I met all these female MPs that were really strong. I mean, I thought I was a force of nature. They were like having good conversations. I was just sitting back. And I just thought, gosh, they've been through so much. And look at this. This is fantastic. So that was one of my great, great, great experiences of going to a country that I knew very little about, and seeing hope around the table and knowing that they are going to make sure things get better for the next generation. I've also been able to see improvements where, somebody has very little and they've been given an opportunity to farm. They're farming with their neighbours, and en masse they sell their yam and everyone eats. So it's like a cooperative. I'm a cooperative MP as well. Not conservative. Cooperative. Yeah, so I've seen some good stuff.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming. I think that this has been a tremendous evening to get to hear from you, to get to hear some of these new bold vision of labor being laid out. Maybe we'll look back in a couple of years, this will have been a historic speech. I know a number of the people in the audience are going to hold you to your pledges on civil society in particular. I hope that includes think tanks as well. And the last thing that I would say is not only to join me in thanking Kate for being here tonight and sharing so much, but then to come and join us outside for a reception and to toast to the resilience of the women of Erbil, I think is a great thing. So thank you so much.